Hello and welcome to the Lively Faith Podcast. I'm your host, the Reverend Nathan Stomberg, and today I'm joined by two of my co-hosts, the Reverend Mark Galloway and Subdeacon Corey DuPont. Today we've got a special episode. We are responding to Fiducia Supplicans, which is the declaration that made waves in the Roman Catholic Church and across the world, released a few days before Christmas in December, and our goal for today is to offer a measured analysis of this document. We're going to talk about what this document is, what it means, and we really want to highlight the, I would say, tragic historic significance of it, while also providing some sanity and rationality to understanding what it means, and also offering some hope to Christians around the world who are affected by this, who are thinking about this, and who are rightfully concerned about the developments that they see coming out of the Vatican. So with that, I'm going to summarize some of the facts about Fiducia Supplicans, what it means for those at a high level who haven't been following the developments too closely. Fiducia Supplicans is a declaration that was issued by the Vatican. It came out of what is called the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. For those who are unfamiliar with that, that was previously an office, or it is an office within the Vatican, but it was previously known as, I think, the Sacred Congregation for the Defense of the Faith.
Doctrine of the Faith.
Doctrine of the Faith.
Yep.
And that goes all the way back to the Inquisition.
Yes.
I believe. Nobody expects the Inquisition.
Always good to get the Inquisition in.
You always got to get the Inquisition in there somewhere.
Well, Monty Python coming.
You always got to fit that in. So Fiducia Supplicans is also entitled on the pastoral meaning of blessings. Fiducia Supplicans literally meaning supplicating trust. And the real monumental impact of this declaration is that it allows for, in the words of the document, blessing of people in irregular situations and same-sex couples. And we're going to dive into parsing through that language and what it means and how it's been received in the church and throughout the world. So I'm going to start by referencing the document itself. So one of the things that gets brought up time and again in debates over Fiducia Supplicans is whether or not you actually read the document. We read it. It was dreadful. And I've highlighted a few of the passages in this declaration that have stirred the most controversy, because really what it comes down to is the nature of blessings, how blessings are received, and what it means when you bless something. So with that, why don't we take a look, before we jump in, is any other initial comments that either of you gentlemen want to share?
Well, just that by the time this is aired, again, as is so often the case with us, there'll have been 10,000 other people have talked about this document again on YouTube and whatever other social media means. But you can't overemphasize the radicalness of this thing, and that I think we all talked right when this thing first broke that, in my opinion, this is the most radical departure in Western Christianity since the Protestant Reformation.
I would agree.
From anything, right? Because it literally totally reverses millennium of teaching from the Roman Church on a paramount moral issue, human anthropology, right? Specifically Christian anthropology. Mm-hmm. And as we know from our previous podcast and the sermon you gave recently, they got tens of thousands of hits. The comments are all over the map on us, and as you mentioned, endlessly people are accusing us of not read the document in the notes because there were comments we made about this, which is such a ludicrous thing. Like we're kindergartners and we wouldn't have read the document, and we don't have the acumen to read the document for what it literally says.
And I think
that's what's so insulting about it.
And I think it speaks also to the nature of the fiasco that the Vatican finds itself mired in now, is that it's sowing confusion. That you've got this document that claims to provide clarity from an office which was supposed to provide clarity on matters of the church, and instead what it's doing is it's sowing confusion about what the document itself actually means, and then also what the Pope really intends with the document itself. And so that's, I think, our goal here is to provide some clarity to that from our non-Catholic perspective.
Right, yeah, and it's really bringing despair to people.
Yeah.
But almost comically, at the end of it, is this nonsensical babble at the end of this document about how there'll be no further clarifications about this thing. And within a week, they had to put out another 5-page document clarifying this because it was such a stupid thing to say in the first place, you know? And it's just amazing what's going on. Corey said it before we came on air, and we've been saying it all along. For the progressive wing of the church, these worms will never go back in the can. Even if they rescind this document, they will never go back in the can, and Germany will never stop doing what it's doing, and progressive Catholic bishops will never stop doing what they're doing right now. And so you will never have unity again, ever, on this sexuality issue in the church.
That's correct. And we're going to get to the list of impacts, including this disunity that's sown by it. But I do want to kind of step through it for those who maybe have less background on the issue as well. One of the first statements that's been getting a lot of attention is the supposed defense of the sacrament of marriage within the document itself. And I'm going to read a passage that starts to lay that out, and that Pope Francis's recent response to the second of 5 questions posed by 2 cardinals offers an opportunity to explore this issue. Further, it is a matter of avoiding that something that is not marriage is being recognized as marriage. Stop right there. How can you bless 2 people in a same-sex relationship without indicating that you're elevating it to a higher status? And this is what I talked about in my sermon from a few weeks ago, is a blessing. The common understanding of blessings is that you are offering an approval of something. Mm-hmm. You're indicating your approval. When God blesses you, he's indicating your approval, his approval of you. When a priest blesses something, he is indicating not only a sign of God's grace, but also his approval of the thing being blessed. And you're really splitting hairs at that point to say that you are blessing people in irregular relationships, and in this case same-sex couples, without also indicating an affirmation of the relationship itself.
Well, it's 2 ways. It's so both in the Roman Catholic tradition, Lutheran Orthodoxy, Lutheran Anglicanism. So the general confession of sin every week at the celebration of the sacrament, right? We kneel in contrition, and we say we've sinned in thought, word, and deed, and things we've done and not left undone. And then the priest, because of the authority given to by the church, pronounces absolution upon you. But it's conditional upon you actually believe that you're a sinner, and you actually believe in the grace of God, and you actually intend to amend your life, right? So the blessing is conditional. It's like at the end of, as a priest, I've given thousands of blessings, right? But so when you give a blessing at the end of Mass, right, a Trinitarian blessing, it's conditional upon the people actually think that God's real, and then they're going to do their best to go and live to the glory of God in the next week. That's not in here at all.
No, it's not. And it also speaks to the nature of blessings here being spontaneous, which I think is very vague in its wording. What does it mean by spontaneous, and why should a priest be obliged to provide a spontaneous blessing when it could put him in a situation where he is inclined then to bless something that is contrary to church teaching and scripture and God's law? That's a rhetorical question, of course. We're going to have a lot of those in this episode.
It's so baffling. 30 years as a priest, right? And like in your own training Corey's getting right now A priest doesn't have to marry anybody. This assumes you have to give a blessing to people. It's your discretion to marry people. You can pass on it. You can tell them they can go find somebody else. Yeah. But especially as the pastor or rector of a parish, it's up to you. If you feel like the conditions don't meet godly standards. But this document's like you're obliged to just spontaneously bless anybody who comes up to you, and it's incomprehensible to me as a priest. I would never do. I mean, never mind my proclivity that I'm a traditional guy, but I just wouldn't do it. Period. Walk up to some guy in the street. Excuse me, can I just bless you? I don't know anything about you, yeah. Right? It's just and that, as compared to that, to say like if you see a homeless person or a person in distress, you pray for them. Yeah. Right. I've done that tens of thousands of times. Well, that's different than going up to somebody and saying, "I'm blessing your lifestyle" or something.
Yeah.
You have no background information about.
Yeah. Well, the blessing is not. And everybody has talked about this, and what in the world does it mean to actually bless, and what does it mean to receive a blessing? And there's this assumption on the part of most people that, well, clergy are obligated in some way to just give me a blessing without any thought of having done so or having to do so. And the blessing is even not necessarily the priest to give.
Right.
The blessing always comes from Christ.
That's a great point.
That's where it comes from. End of story, right? Christ is not going to bless anything that he's already foreordained as sin. You can't do it. You cannot bless sin. I mean, it's so fundamental a principle from the beginning of the Bible to its end and throughout the entire history of the church in every direction of the world, right? And now, apparently, it's a mystery. What is a blessing? What do you mean, what is a blessing? Haven't you read?
Yeah.
What in the world are you talking about?
It's sad we can laugh about that.
But yeah, where's the confusion coming from? And also, the question that I had pretty shortly after this was released is, what was lacking? Why was this development required? What was lacking in the sacrament of penance and reconciliation? And I think we explained it already. Nothing was lacking, which is why this document is so problematic.
Yeah, or in the tradition of just giving a blessing, period. What was it that needed to be? What was it like? It wasn't like you need an ecumenical council to correct something.
Yeah.
Right. There was nothing wrong.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So I want to get to the passage. I think it's on page 5 here, section 3, which is really the bombshell portion of the statement itself. Within the horizon outlined here appears the possibility of blessings for couples in irregular situations and for couples of the same sex. We'll pause there.
It's the word. It's the word couples.
It's the word couples, and that's where observers will note the most argument taking place, where the defenders of the statement will say there's a distinction, quote unquote, between couples and relationships, that they're saying couples refer to a pairing of individuals, and you are supposedly blessing the two individuals in their capacity as individuals, and somehow there's supposed to be a separation from the union of the two together.
It's complete intellectual duplicity. Like, just substitute the word people right there. The possibility of blessing people or a person in an irregular situation. It would change the whole tenor of it, right? And it would make us curmudgeons we'd have less fuel right now if that word just was people instead of couples.
It'd be, from a linguistic perspective, it would be more defensible on their end. And I think the other...
And even less necessary to have done it in the first place. But
right. And I think the wording in this first sentence of couples in irregular situations even further opens up the can of worms, because as soon as you start substituting same-sex couples for other people in irregular situations, it reveals the folly of the document in itself. So what if you have a man who has abandoned his wife and has shown up with his mistress? Well, that's a relationship in an irregular situation. What if you have a man who is attracted to a minor and shows up with a 14-year-old girl seeking a blessing? Well, that's a relationship in a regular situation. And how in the world is a priest supposed to, or polygamy? How is a priest supposed to bless any of those?
Yep.
So that is where the consternation comes from, I think, the strongest amongst conservative and Orthodox Christian observers, not only in the Roman Catholic Church, but in Christian traditions across the world. And we'll get to the impact to Christians across the world very shortly. So that was the biggest portion of the document. And then I had one more highlighted here that it's over on page 4 later on in section 3. In this sense, it is essential to grasp the Holy Father's concern that these non-ritualized blessings never cease being simple gestures that provide an effective means of increasing trust in God on the part of people who ask for them. Careful that they should not become a liturgical or semi-liturgical act similar to a sacrament. Again, there is an ignorance in writing this statement because it totally...
Well, it's not ignorance.
Well, maybe not ignorance, but there is a duplicity in writing this statement that one would think, well, don't you understand that it's not going to be received that way? You can't bless someone in a way that is totally devoid of any ritual, because you're naturally going to invoke some sort of prayer. You're going to be in some place. As a priest, you're generally going to be in a church, and already there are going to be other implications and significances attributed to said blessing.
It's so ludicrous as a priest, for me. It's so ludicrous, this, right? It doesn't tell you. So why would I be out of bounds if the couple came in front of me and there's no guidelines what the prayer can and can't say? So I would say, Frank and Tom, may the Lord bless your intimacy, blah, blah, right? Can you imagine, Corey, all the things that the progressive priest is going to go into saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
the latitude there is...
It's so ridiculous. Of course they're going to do that.
Yes, it's very, yeah.
Of course it's going to do that. It's exactly what James Martin is doing, right? Mm-hmm. And thousands of priests in Germany and all around the world are doing it already. They've already been doing liturgical same-sex blessings in Germany for 2 or 3 years. So it's like, which is, even mentioned that it's already happening in this church. So again, it's such a fraud. This document, it's such an intellectual fraud that's doing it.
Yeah.
It's
And related to that, again, going back to the statement that the church's teaching on marriage remains firm, according to this document. Anyone who has been associated with the Anglican Communion within the last 20 or 30 years, 50 years, is having flashbacks to exactly the same thing happening. And it's
identical.
The folly of, quote unquote, affirming that church teaching hasn't changed technically in word, yet acting contrary and affirming that which is contrary to church teaching is totally duplicitous, and it's dishonest. And if neither of those things, it's insanity to think that it doesn't functionally change what the church is teaching.
I was ordained a priest in 1995, and within a year I was elected right into the machinery of the Episcopal Church, right up to to the General Convention, the highest functioning body in the church, right? And this is it's the exact same conversation. Exactly.
Yep.
Right, for us.
Yep.
Oh, we didn't change the Book of Common Prayer. It still says marriage is between a man and a woman. I said, yeah, but you're bringing people of the same sex into your church and using the exact same parlance and gestures that you would, and then you treat them. The point is, you're going to treat them like they're married. You're going to give them the same rights, privileges within the ecclesiastical community as people who are joined in the sacrament of holy matrimony. It's which was instituted by God in creation, even, right? And He created order. It's incredible. But Corey and I can lay out every single step that's going to happen, and we'll be almost 100% correct exactly how this is going to go. We've been through this, Mm-hmm. The ordination women came when I was getting a mastery at Yale in 1992, and I wrote a paper, made a presentation. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. No, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
They're never going to be bishops, right? And then the same-sex marriage, you said, oh, they're going to be doing in vitro. We're going to be baptizing kids who were never, ever made in conjugal union. No, none of that's going to happen. It all happens. And it's all going to happen in the Catholic Church now, too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, you already have transgender godparents.
True.
Right? Which is an impossibility. That's a theological impossibility to say, I'm going to be this person's spiritual mother or father in lieu of their biological parents. You only can do that if you're actually going to uphold all that the church teaches. But denying your Christian anthropology that you're not actually the gender you were born as disqualifies you to do any of that. So it's so illogical, right? And so this is just stepping on the nonsense that's already come before it. And the quagmire is just going to get worse and worse.
Yeah.
And
the order, though, in which is going to take place is going to be very different from the way that it did within Anglicanism, because
yes, this is from the top up, down.
Well, the understanding of priesthood, because there's that slight difference between Anglicanism and Catholicism. It wasn't so much out of the ordinary for Episcopalians to say, well, a woman can be a priest. Roman Catholics are not going to start from the priesthood. They're going to start from outside the institution
and then go
toward the priesthood. Because of the vaulted status.
This went the other direction.
Yeah.
It's an interesting.
Yeah, the ordination woman was the crack that.
Right.
Because you busted that Christian anthropology, and then you're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's exactly. It's true.
Yeah, that's very astute.
I mean, you could even go back. You can go back to Lambeth 38. When the Church of England begins to
930.
Excuse me, I misspoke.
Artificial control,
contraception, right?
Yep.
And so they worm their way in with the whole reinterpretation of the human person and human sexuality, and then they get to the priesthood. But it's going to play the same way. The last thing to go will be formal Roman Catholic sexual ethics. It can't not but go once you begin doing something like this.
Well, you can't put it back together.
And the other problem is, in my perspective, from an Orthodox perspective, is that there's a long-standing problem within most Western Christianities of separating orthodoxy from orthopraxy.
Yes.
You can't do that. You just can't do that. The two have to...
Explain that for our audience.
So orthodoxy, simply translated, right belief.
Right belief, or more literally, right glory. But orthopraxy, also literally being translated. I mean, it is similar to lex orandi, lex credendi, right?
Yeah.
Right practice.
Right practice, or the rule of prayer is the rule of belief. But this is something that, in my observation, and I could be entirely incorrect, but that in my observation over the centuries, this is this notion of adiaphora, right? That there's enough latitude which exists within multiple traditions in order to maintain a common dogmatic theological core, but at the same time allow for a latitude of practice.
And adiaphora being things that
things
are
indifferent, right?
Correct.
And it works for a while within a Christian culture. You can get away with it.
As long as it stays homogenous.
Yes. But post-Christian culture, it's not going to work.
Right. Well, it's the reformists straight out, right? That was Luther and Calvin's inability to come to agreement on the nature of the whole Eucharist. So all this stuff in the gray matter became adiaphora in the West, right? And that's affected Catholicism in the West, too.
Eventually, sure.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
And so it worked as long as all Presbyterians were Scots, right? And all Lutherans were Germans and Scandinavians. But and they all married each other. But when they intermarried and the culture broke down and they started speaking the vernacular in America, it all went to pot.
Right.
Right? And,
I think that's a good transition to the first of the many different fallouts from this declaration. I mean, there's so many we could touch upon. I outlined a few here just to guide our conversation. I think first and foremost is the secular and media reception of the wording that we just discussed here, that it's being celebrated as a win for so-called LGBTQ rights, or a step in the quote-unquote right direction toward same-sex marriage, or others without context, and I've heard this already, is they'll see it already as the church approving full same-sex marriage. Oh, well, I heard Pope Francis, he just approved same-sex marriages. Well, it is a step in that direction. Technically, it didn't happen, but for a culture now that is versed far more in secularism and really totally misunderstands Christianity, that's what they're going to see. They're going to see the rainbow flag superimposed on top of this document.
I think more than anything, the part of me just can't believe that Cardinal Fernandez in the Pope is this naive. That you living in the world today and knowing how divided the world is across the spectrum, the geopolitics, it's divided, obviously, on sexuality, right? And the church, it's clearly divided, right? But it was so imprudent to do this. It's like off the scale how imprudent this thing was. Is that you're the vicar of Christ, you're the ultimate father of the Christian family. This is like, you would never do this as a parent, right? It's so imprudent. And so the entire African continent, which is the fastest growing Christian community on earth, the Catholic Church in Africa, the entire continent said, we're not doing this.
Right.
Right. All the polls, Hungary, everywhere where the church is growing, right, and still has the most moral authority within the culture, they're saying absolutely not. It's like, what? Why would you ever think this was going to be received this way?
Yeah.
Especially by Africans who've got to deal with Islam by the millions, right?
Yeah.
They literally put their people in mortal
I
danger
was just going to say, yeah.
by doing this.
Yeah.
It's like, and you're the father of the family, and you're going to say, and this document insists they have to do it.
Right.
You put priests and bishops in an impossible situation that literally endangers the lives of the souls of baptized people. That borders on evil. Is that too strong of a word?
Yeah.
Is that too strong of a word?
It's bad parenting.
Yeah.
It's bad parenting.
It's scandal in the least.
It's incredible. So if the Africans had, bended and said, we have to do it, and this is the ultimate conflict, isn't it, for prelates? They're going to, like, the whole doctrine of the papacy in the first place.
Sure.
And but if they bend to this, and 2 million Christians lose their lives, heck, thousands lose their lives every week in the Sudan or something, right? Mm-hmm. What responsibility is the Vatican going to take for that?
Right.
And all these Pope splainers that have been trashing us, your sermon and our comments, I don't get it. I don't get it. I get their defense of the papacy because they have to.
Yeah.
Their whole faith rises and falls almost, not on the cross or on the ascension or redemption, but on the institution of the papacy. And I'm generally pro-papacy and as a high church Anglican, but they're confused about what it means, what the role. It's a distortion of Vatican I. That's why I texted each of you. It's a complete distortion. The Pope's not infallible in everything he says and does. Quite to the contrary. And there's only been two, really, if you really go technically, there's only been two infallible doctrines ever even promulgated from the throne of Peter, right? The two Marian doctrines. And so
I think
they go on and on. Well, the Pope said it, therefore it's real, it's fact, you can't question it. Baloney, you can't question it. Paul didn't have any problem confronting Peter about the circumcision
that's right.
of Gentiles.
That's right.
How has it changed?
Exactly. And to your point, I think I shared this with both of you previously. I noticed it almost as a parallel to the Protestant evangelical notion of sola scriptura, where those espousing this limitless defense of Pope Francis is almost like a sola papal sort of mindset, where now it's, well, you have to take the words of the Pope as they stand and not interpret them against the rule of Scripture and against God's law and against 2,000 years of church teaching. So I found that fascinating, and how that attitude, that reception of this document is in a way a parallel to the Protestant Reformation, which obviously led to its own break off from the Catholic Church. And one of the many impacts that I see potentially happening here is maybe not so much a hard schism. I don't think that's likely, but I've been calling it and not that it's impossible, but I think an ideological schism is far more likely, at least to happen
Already
first.
exists.
Exactly. Where you'll see bishops in different dioceses doing whatever they want with regard to how the document is received and disregarding the
Just
Pope.
like the Anglican world for the last
That's right.
40 years.
So then the impact of that is a weakening of the authority of the papacy, a weakening of Rome as an institution throughout the world. And that is especially where the impacts to other non-Catholic Christians comes in. As we've talked before, when Rome sneezes, the world catches a cold. People look to the Roman Catholic Church for good or for ill as the image of what Christians believe.
You see, Francis, tell me how wet am I in this. Francis has the wrong influence. He has the influence on the wrong people. He's respected by a bunch of pagan journalists who think he's a hero for progressive causes in Western culture. Therefore, but his moral authority with people who are actually regenerate is becoming nil.
Yeah.
Right? It's the opposite of John Paul II, which really was the pinnacle since Vatican I of papal authority. And it was like, in a sense, it was a perfect storm because of where he came from, Polish. He stood up against the Nazis. He was the prominent personage that brought down, at least from a moral standpoint, communism, right? And so he had the most moral clout person of any prelate in the modern history. It's just the opposite. And he didn't care what the secular media thought about him ever. It's just the opposite here. It'll take, if the papacy can survive with any serious ability to govern the Catholic Church, spread across countless cultures in virtually every country on earth, to reclaim moral authority could take centuries.
It would be a long uphill battle for sure.
But most likely it'll be a long-term thing because many of the Pope splainers, we're calling them, or just conservative Catholics in general are saying, well, this hopefully will get fixed when we get, either the next Pope or the next conservative traditional Pope. And I mean, it just betrays their own ignorance of the institution because he's already stacked the College of Cardinals to his favor and to the favor of his posterity.
Well, even if a Pius X got elected, how do you fix it?
Right.
You'd have to remove every bishop and every priest that was teaching false doctrine, right? You'd be talking tens of thousands of people, and you have nobody to replace them with, by the way,
right?
And you have no money coming in, right? So all of these things that you and I as clergy know how there's truth, and then there's truth in the church, right? And the biggest truth that runs the church is money.
Especially the Roman Catholic Church, and not to sound like a jerk, but any
one of them.
Yeah.
Any one of them.
Yeah.
So money determines how much courage many priests and prelates have.
Right.
There's very few who
right
have the courage to speak outside of the confines of the dollar.
Yeah.
And this is just going to. I read one thing from Peter's Pence. It was the former Anglican priest said that.
Longenecker.
Yeah, Longenecker says we're going to go from Peter's Pence to Peter's pennilessness.
Yeah. And
that's absolutely going to be true.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, just from a survival standpoint, if I'm a secular guy and I'm like counseling Francis, I'm going, dude, this is a dumb idea. Yeah. Because you're going to have billions of less dollars than you have right now.
Bad economics.
Just from a worldly standpoint, the prudent inference, this is ridiculous.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. It's true.
I'd like to switch gears a little bit in that same vein too, as far as how Catholics are impacted. I want to think about for our listeners what our conservative and Orthodox Catholic friends are going through, those who are rightfully concerned and dismayed with the fallout from this document. And what we've said before, I think that they're really going to to have to go through and are going through a period of mourning to understand and process what's happening. I think it's easy for us from our non-Catholic perspective to see how everything is so cut and dry and it's plain and simple, and oh well, the answer is, well, you just do this or you do this, and why don't you just stand up and say this thing or that thing? Where for an ordinary faithful Catholic person, this is a monumental change that's going to take time to grieve and to process, and I think we want to be sensitive to that too. But the big question that they will all need to answer is what it means to stay Catholic for those who choose or decide that they want to remain with the Roman Catholic Church. What does that mean to stay Catholic? Or will they decide to go to church elsewhere? And so that's really the big decision that's going to get made by a number of Catholics. Millions of Catholics around the world.
Billions, in a sense. What is there, 1.5 billion Catholics? No, I think family members and friends that have texted me by the hundreds in the last month about this thing, they're in existential crisis.
Yeah.
Like the fabric of they wouldn't use the word, but their soteriology is totally been upended. Right? So they don't know where they're going to go on this, because time's going to tell. Because what do you do in the whole African continent? It says this isn't going to happen. So are they not good Catholics?
Right. What does that mean?
And they're the ones who actually baptize people and convert people to Christ and confirm people, and they have so many vocations. I just read this last night because I wanted to have facts. They have to turn people away from seminary. They have so many vocations.
Wow.
Between the Anglican and Catholic Church in Nigeria, it's unbelievable. There's 40 million Anglicans in Nigeria. More Anglicans go to church in Nigeria on a Sunday than the rest of the world.
Wow.
In one country. And Catholicism is very similar, right? So if you took the whole statistical amount of people who went to Mass on a Sunday, overwhelmingly they'd be Africans, right? And so it's African priests that are going to fill altars and pulpits of, I don't know, it's going to be a massive amount of Catholic parishes in America for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
Right? So they're going to be duplicitous enough to say, you're wrong, but we need you to come to America and to Europe to be the pastors of our dying Catholic parishes, because we can't produce a single vocation, because we can't motivate young men to want to make the sacrifices to give their life to the church.
Oh yeah, young straight men.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the real challenge. What young straight man is going to want to be a Roman Catholic priest now? I remember, as you guys know, I work in a Catholic school, and every now and then we're periodically required to show our male students vocation videos. They do nothing but poke fun at them, and I sort of sit back and I kind of have mixed emotions about it.
And that's something I'm unfamiliar with. When you talk about a vocation video, what are you describing?
Material that is explicitly produced in order to garner the interest
so it's
of young men, almost like a Marines recruitment video, if you will.
Yeah.
And there may have been a time when that was effective, but I mean nowadays even young men in a middle school or a high school context will look at that video, and I know this from firsthand experience, and they just giggle and they laugh and say, I'm not going to do that. Yeah. Because we all know what kind of guy does that, right? So
if you grew up in the church in the 60s and 70s, at least once a year you had somebody come in that would speak to the parish, specifically even to kids as young as the 5th or 6th grade, trying to, used to be a thing called pre-seminary in the 60s. You went off to a high school that would lead to college, to lead to seminary. And so Corey's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And we unfortunately know what happened in some of those institutions.
I checked this last night. This is not going to be a surprise to you, right? So I have not been in the diocese, Episcopal diocese, since my ceremoniously booting out in 2006, right?
Graduation.
I think I counted 51 parishes and missions left. There was 75 when I was ordained, right? But if I were to ask you, So there's 50 posts, vicars or rectors. What percentage do you think of them are male? Would you guess out of those 50 jobs?
27%.
I would say 8 to 10%.
Yeah.
Lower than that. Wow.
Yeah.
And what percentage, so that tells you what percentage of them are women. But overall, out of those 50, forget if there's any assistants or curates or anything, what percentage of them are not straight, either male or females, and they're the rectors or vicars of those parishes? What percentage?
Even lower number.
Probably 80%.
Yeah, it's about, and that's just my rough estimate. Is like, it's unbelievable. And it's like, how could, wherever you are, how do you think that represents the world and represents some effective model? Because it's a rhetorical question, because they have no interest in evangelizing the world at all.
No.
Zero. I went through every website 2 days ago, which was enough to give me angina, like just looking at the websites. Not a single one ever talks about sin. They don't even mention Jesus as Lord and Savior. There's all these obnoxious
Websites of
mission
churches.
Yeah, mission statements that have nothing to do
Social action.
with the gospel.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, they're all dying. It's not a single church growing, not even close. They're dying at an astronomical rate. And it just is an the whole thing is a failure. And why the Catholic Church would ever want to mimic what has just been a disaster for Protestantism, it just baffles my mind.
And I want to go back to the interesting flip side of what Corey was talking about with the vocation videos is if you go online and you look at the content that is most popular among Christians and Catholics, it's all Orthodox and conservative stuff. There are no thriving liberal Catholic YouTube channels out there. The
Talk
stuff
shows.
that people are seeking out, they're all
It's none of the secular.
they're all SSPX, they're all Latin Mass stuff, they're all
Right.
conservative Orthodox commentators that are generating all this attention, which is almost like the back end of, those are the real vocation videos that, for those who
It
are
is.
seeking it out, that's what's still inspiring people to convert to the Roman
They
Catholic
get
Church.
millions and millions and millions of views.
Yeah. So I just, an interesting parallel that
That is
that reminded me of.
Right.
right. So your buddy the trad, he gets what, hundreds of thousands of people.
Frad, Pints with Aquinas,
Yeah.
you're thinking of?
Oh, yeah,
I
Frad,
mean,
yeah.
he's approaching 500,000 subscribers. He gets
Very popular.
hundreds of thousands of hits on
Right.
his videos.
Right.
Yeah, he's
Even if you had a Roman Catholic version even if you had Fulton Sheen, a reincarnation of Fulton Sheen, I doubt he'd get 500,000 hits in this culture.
well, and so that's the other thing too, is you'll get reposts of Fulton Sheen sermons, for example. They do incredibly well. They still hold up to the test of time.
Because they're true,
Exactly, the truth never changes.
right?
But even someone like Matt Fradd, for example, there's a certain duplicity in how he's dealt with this issue as well. I saw a video
He's
where
been pretty hands off with it.
I've seen,
Walking the fence.
of course. I mean, I've seen quite a few videos of a lot of these different guys who are very popular, like you were talking about, right? And having all their different positions and responses juxtaposed with one another, and they're all just dancing around it. The only one who I have seen that hasn't danced around it at all, just being blatantly honest, I mean, to the point of outrage, was he used to do work with Taylor Marshall.
Timothy Gordon.
Tim Gordon. Yeah, Tim
Yeah.
Gordon. I mean, he
Yeah.
really, and he went through the document, broke it down, and was very honest and said, nope, this is what it says. It doesn't take a scholar from the Pontificum to know how to read this document. I mean, it just takes basic middle school sentence structuring for you to figure out how this works, guys. And he's very honest about it, and he's angry.
Yeah, there have been few others in
And
those
he's
circles,
smarter
too.
than 90% of the bishops, and so
Yeah.
they don't like him.
Right.
Brian Holdsworth has done a pretty good job.
I
he's
listened
done,
last
he's done a
night.
better job. I mean, he hasn't gone as far as like what you're saying.
Yeah.
But
He has a dilemma, Nathan. Every relatively recent convert.
yeah,
Right? He's been a Catholic for 15 years, and he's cut out this niche, which is kind of unique. He has
it's
had folks who look to him and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Mhm.
But how do you get away from that? How do you
Right.
it's like all converts. Like I've joked with Corey about it. Like everything's wonderful on the other side of a river when you first go over there.
Until
you ever realize there's as much murkiness in my river as there is in other rivers.
Yeah.
Right. And it just causes huge intellectual dilemma. I noticed he had huge problems when this thing first broke, and he had the picture of Martin blessing the first, and he's like, I can't accept this.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know where to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the problem for all faithful Catholics, and you're going to see this play out over time as they go through this process of mourning, and they'll either come to grips with what's happening, or they'll continue to dance around.
How about our friends? I have dozens that went, from Anglicanism by the most gracious ecumenical document ever written by Benedict to allow the Ordinariate to come into existence, which is utterly unique in Catholic history. It's a non-geographical diocese in essence. But all those guys by the hundreds who left Anglicanism to go into Catholicism, and I was that close, right? And they battle all those years in the frying pan. What's the difference?
It's deja vu all over again.
And there's got to be a huge. I'm not going to divulge, but I've talked to a couple, and they're just like, just dismayed because they know, and they're basically old men now.
Right.
He goes, now we're going to spend our whole rest of our lives in the same stinking fight I just was in.
Yeah.
For the previous 40 years of my priesthood.
Right? I'm sure there's an element of feeling trapped.
Yeah, I think they feel abandoned, dismayed, duped.
Duped, yeah.
Almost like Jeremiah, you duped me, And the other thing is, you're interested in your opinion, Corey, on this, because we talked about it when I decided not to go in, because of my friend I mentioned.
I remember
from the North Shore. He goes,
talked a lot about it.
Don't do it because the Pope will not give you dispensation, because the Pope to the office at the Vatican says, he goes, you need to be a much more moderate Anglican. He goes, they're just going to Google your name. Out, right? And just like who's going to become a Roman Catholic priest, a straight guy, who's going to go in the Anglican Orient now?
Right. Well, you can still get married. Well, even then.
Well, you have to be married.
Well, you have to be married.
You have to be a married priest when you come in.
Right.
So, but why are you going to go in?
Yeah.
Especially if you're at the Anglo-Catholic persuasion, and you say, well, if I'm already dealing with all this crap on this side of the river, why am I going to go deal with it on that side of the river?
Yeah, at least here I have
because they know, unlike the splainers, the absolute sewer that's going to come down the road.
Yeah.
They know because they've lived through it. I think you said this to me 4 or 5 years ago, that you wouldn't be surprised if this Pope just gets rid of the Ordinariate. If he can just get rid of the Latin Mass, why doesn't he just get rid of the Ordinariate? But I do believe under canon law, the way Benedict wrote it, it's into the Constitution of the Church. It'd be like getting rid of, it literally it corresponds to Eastern Catholic rite.
Yeah.
So it probably can't be, I don't know if a Pope can, I guess the Pope can do whatever he wants, I guess.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to get to the bottom of, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
I mean, standing outside the tradition, all three of us, we know and believe he can't do whatever he wants, right? We would be there. But
the fact is he can't do whatever he wants.
Right.
But that's how it's interpreted.
Yes, that's how it's interpreted.
Right.
Yeah.
So one last bucket that I want to take a look at, we haven't spent too much time in, is the additional impact to Christians of other traditions. And going back to the question we always ask is, why should other Christians care about this? And I think we touched upon some of it, but like the point that you made about Roman Catholics in Africa, really around the world to a lesser degree, it's going to make being a professing conservative Orthodox Christian, it's going to make it much more difficult to be that type of Christian, especially in Western culture that is already so ravenously opposed to a biblical ethic of sexual morality and sex and the whole slate of those issues, marriage included. So it makes the job of evangelization and of ministry that much more difficult for Orthodox believers.
It's going to be devastating to, I think if you talk to Albert Mohler, who I think's in his own existential crisis over the Southern Baptist Convention, right? Because they're going to divide over the same issues.
Yeah.
It's a matter of how quick incrementally it's going to happen, is that Protestants, especially American evangelicals who think they invented Christianity, they will never admit it, but they've always lived under the protection, the shadow of the moral authority of the Roman Church.
True.
They'll never admit it, but they always have, and it's cover. It's been cover. And then they use it, they juxtapose it when they can attack it to their socio-political advantage within their particular denominational structures. They do this, we do they. So that's been the whole history of American Protestantism, but not so much for Episcopalians, but certainly the whole evangelical free church. The problem for Rome, again, the naivety, the lack of awareness of what role American evangelicals play in the evangelization of the whole world, you're playing right into the hands of fundamentalists, right into the hands of the Mormons, to go into all these places where people are going to abandon you because you've lost moral authority, and they're going to fill the vacuum along with the Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's just,
especially in Europe,
so illogically stupid to have gone in this direction. It gains you nothing. It gains you nothing. But the bottom line is this, right? In every parish I had, there was gay and lesbian people. I ministered to them probably a couple hundred in my 25 years, right, as an active priest. And I always tried to use prudence and to be pastoral, right? In my opinion, it was never anybody else's business about somebody else's sexuality. If they came to me sincerely, I took them at their word that they were trying to do these. I didn't single them out. I had more adulterers in my parishes than I ever had homosexuals, right? And I had certainly, and those of us who are priests and going to be priests know that men just with pornography problems is the most overwhelming pandemic in the church, right? And so I never singled out people of same-sex attraction as being parasites in my parishes. I tried to be a good pastor, right? Now, the left never sees you that way.
Yeah.
They think I was hanging people out and hanging the homosexuals out on the front lawn on a weekly basis, right? It's just massive what's going to go on. But whenever there's a void, something else always fills it.
Nature abhors a vacuum.
And
Morality
that's
abhors
what's going to happen here. So it just plays in the hand of fundamentalism.
Yeah.
Right. So for instance, in the Southern Baptist Convention, the fundamentalist wing is just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger, right, until it becomes its own entity again, and then it'll live 50 years apiece until it busts up again. The same patterns will keep going on and on. But you can't underplay even Orthodoxy, right? In the West is going to have to deal with this. Orthodoxy not in North America can speak a different language than it's going to have to try to speak, because Orthodoxy has got to somehow start evangelizing non-ethnic people in North America to numerically survive in any significant way into the future, right? So their challenge is totally different. And now that Rome loses its mind, it makes your job as a future Orthodox priest way. I said it to him. Your job to preach the gospel effectively as a person who sees himself as a Catholic Anglican just became immensely more difficult. Immensely, right? Because the fundy is just going to say to you, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Right? And then you got to even resharpen your apologetic tools more than you already have. Right? And you're going to speak from tradition and the fathers and all that, and they're going to go, it's just the Bible and me, baby.
Yeah. Right.
And so it's a bad.
Yeah, look where
deal.
look where tradition brought the Roman Catholic Church.
Yes.
That's what they'll say.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what they'll say.
Yep.
So some concluding thoughts, and the first, which I think may sound a bit paradoxical since we've spent this time discussing these matters, but as far as encouragement for and advice for concerned Christians around the world, the first thing that I would say is your own personal faithfulness to Christ and what's going on in your family and in your local congregation and in your home is far more important than anything that's happening in Rome. Obviously, what's happening in Rome is of great importance on matters such as this, but we can't let it drag us into depression or despair. We need to focus on these principles of subsidiarity, and that's really where the faithfulness.
Again, Father Dwight
has to
said that
begin.
really, really powerfully. He says, think local in your parish.
Right.
Think local in your parish.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the faithful 65-year-old woman who's raised her children, sent them to Catholic school and Catholic college, and says her rosary every day and goes to mass every day. Vatican nonsense isn't going to play a whole lot in her life, right? And so, in a sense, if the faithful can hold their ground, in the sense that what they believe is true,
Yeah.
and then truth can't be changed, for the rest of their lives, I think they could find peace. I think for the younger generations, you and Josh, 30 and younger, you're going to fight such a tide on the other side. It's just, can you imagine it, Corey?
Yeah, I mean, I think for younger guys and younger women too. I don't want to exclude young women.
No, absolutely not.
But just single people, they're not going to have the luxury of falling back on decades and decades of personal piety, for example,
right.
and that sort of perseverance that
Right.
the 65-year-old or 70-year-old woman with her rosary is going to be able to summon in order to deal with this and then just leave this world.
Yeah.
The younger people who don't have families yet, I mean, they're going to have to be confronted with decisions. I mean, I've got a long life ahead of me. My faith matters to me, or so it would seem. What do I do? What do I do? I don't like what's going on, so what do I do? Oh, now I have children. What if I take my child to Mass, and I'm there with my young wife, and I have 2 small children, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the priest just says, during or after the Mass, oh, we're just going to bless Tom and Jake. Come on down. I mean,
Exactly what's going to happen.
that's exactly what's going to happen. And that's what I've told many of the Pope's splainers and whatnot, because you're not looking at the practical here. You're not looking at life on the ground level in any church situation, and you're just living between orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Well, what happens when the two meet? And they inevitably do, for better or for worse, right? Well, when it does meet, and that's you in there with your family, where's your Pope splaining then? Like, what are you going to do? I mean, any real man would say, I'm not coming back here.
Right.
Because my kids are never going to see this again,
Mhm.
ever. Right? So that's what young men are going to do. And I'm sure we'll talk, if not today, at some point, maybe down the road, about the crisis of young men today and all the things that they have
There's
to
a
deal
lot-
with.
a
Right?
lot for us to say
Emasculation.
about
Oh,
that.
the emasculation. This doesn't help this at all.
It's devastating to it.
It's awful.
It's I was thinking last night. Obviously we were this refuge, tiny Anglican entity in Rhode Island. We had 300 people, but at one point it was 8 presbyters and me, right? But I was just thinking, can you imagine when you were on staff, right, back in the day, if I just by fiat said, we're just going to, by my authority as a bishop, we're just going to bless same-sex unions. Oh,
Bye-bye.
yeah. What are the other 8 presbyters going to say? They're going to say, have you lost your mind?
Yeah.
Like, the reason why we're here is because we've put all our faith in the scriptures and tradition of the church. That's why we exist. And now you're just going to, by waving your hand, tell us that.
Right.
I know it's a tiny microcosm, but isn't that not what has happened at the highest
Well, it's a
level?
microcosm of a larger whole.
Yes.
Right, in the culture.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And
See more of it.
it's like, oh, you do what I tell you to do. No.
And that's not going to work also, too, if we look at the situation within the larger context that we're living in right now, where there's already distrust of every single major institution in society today.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, the last 4 years in this weird silver lining sort of way have shown all the fault lines
Cracks
of our
are
culture,
everywhere,
right? And young men are keenly aware of this more than most other people. So they're not going to tolerate anything less than absolute dedication and just real courage. And again, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, at some other point, but this is also why so many young men today are considering Islam.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because Islam, they don't ask whether or not Islam is true, but they see it and they say, I don't know if it's true.
Men that have the family there.
Powerful.
But it's powerful.
And
It's
not
masculine.
weak, and it's masculine. It's
Yeah.
masculine, and that's
Very
what
masculine.
young men want. Just by nature, that's what they want. It's not just because the culture deprives them of it.
Well, made that way.
They're made that way, right? So that's what they want.
Right.
That's where they're going to go.
It's a great point.
Right. And instead, we're talking about how women think they're men, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you know, we need male versions of Riley Gaines, right? Right? That woman is so brave, right? Saying, "You're not a woman. You shouldn't be swimming against me," right? And we need the same thing in the church.
Yeah.
Semper Fi. I've said this many times. We need good men.
Yeah.
And like you said, in that when it doesn't matter who the vocation director is, when you're trying to sell this to a sound young male who knows that he's a male and wants to be a male, forget it.
Right.
Absolutely zero chance.
I mean, the tragedy of all of this really is that a woman like Riley Gaines even has to do what she's doing. There should be 20 men for just her one person who should be putting themselves out there and saying, you are not going to participate in this competition. You're not going into the ladies' locker room. You're not using her restroom. And if you do it, you're going to regret it.
Right.
Right. And this is part and parcel of that larger context.
Oh, it is.
It doesn't help it. It makes it so much worse. So much worse.
Right. Well, yeah, this just, I went to a wedding in the Episcopal Church 2 weeks ago. It was unbelievable. It was so bad. And I haven't been in an Episcopal Church in 15 years, right? It was horrific. It was just horrific. It was a priestess. She screwed up the service, didn't even follow the rubrics of the prayer book. You would have been having angina and just throwing up for like an hour straight, right? They do the traditional vows, but then after the traditional vows, then she lets them do that stupid thing where they do their vows to each other. You're the best thing since wind on my face, and when I'm not happy, and my wife's just grabbing my knee, like she's just squeezing it because I'm just sitting there, and then she preaches this sermon that was so gross. She says, "I've got to know you." And I especially enjoyed getting to know your cats and your dogs. And it's been so wonderful, right? You two have been lovers now for 3 years. She literally says this. and I'm just going, this is reality, right? It was just, and then of course it comes times of the Eucharist. Never mind Baptist. You had to be baptized. Never mind closing the rail or having fences.
Right.
Wherever you are in life, whatever faith you have or don't have, everybody's welcome at this table because this is the Lord's house. And it's like, honey, it's the opposite of that. That's the reality. It's unbelievable. But that's normative. That's probably 80% across the board, right?
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, it was unbelievable.
Wow.
And
to kind of rein us back in here, I think all the issues that you're pointing to bring me to the next piece of advice that I wanted to share, which is to be courageous. That in the face of the declaration Fiducia Supplicans, as difficult and as tragic as it is, though it accelerates things to whatever degree, it doesn't change the direction that the culture has already been moving in. It doesn't change the overall equation of what faithful Christians
It expedites it.
have already faced. Right, it expedites it, but it doesn't change what our job was already as faithful men, faithful women in the church, to be courageous in the face
As
of these
clerics.
things, and as clerics, and also to be joyful.
Yeah.
It should not rob us of our joy in Christ.
It's the hardest thing. You're 3 years in as a priest, right? Corey's been in ministry for years. And we've talked about it in your experience in the Orthodox Church. How often have you run into complete joy with these people, right? Like about who Jesus is, the resurrection. We have the glorious tradition, now we have to raise money by selling cookies this week, right? And all the other stuff. And that's going to be it's going to be your greatest challenge for you. And you're already experiencing it. It's like if we don't radiate joy, don't expect anybody else to ever want to come here.
Yeah.
Right? We're victorious, right? We're the victors, right? The whole Pauline thing. Nothing separates us from the love of God, right? Count it all joy. It's like, I've been in this thing for a long time. It's just a tiny minority that's ever been like that I've pastored, right? And I've talked about it ad nauseum. And it's going to be even harder for you. Because, like you said, young people look at the world, what is it to be joyous about?
Yeah. Yep.
Right? Their future, education, job opportunities, right?
Yeah.
Young people are trying to buy a house.
Global collapse.
Right. Right. So we have to get them from the temporal to the eternal as preachers and as pastors. And that's an immensely difficult job when things were thriving in the 90s. Never mind now in the 2020s. It's we have to be realistic about it all. I think that's always when we're talking, we have to always deal in reality, not some fiction, not something we want it to be, but what it actually is. And even in your preaching, as you know, that'll get you kicked in the butt quite a bit on if you're going to actually do it, because they want you to be an entertainer and tell them everything's fine, and they can bend as many of the rules as they want, and you're gonna support them in that. And so it's a tremendous challenge.
Jesus in John chapter 16, I've said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world.
Yes. The church will survive. It will not survive in its current entity.
It won't always look the way that
the
it
church
looks right
will be
now.
reformed and restructured by God.
That's right.
We'll be long gone. We'll be long gone. But how people gather, where they gather for our ancestors won't be what we're doing right now. It won't be.
We lose sight of that, but God is indeed still in control over everything that is happening right now.
Yes.
God is sovereign. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up our conversation. Thank you both gentlemen for the great conversation today. There's so much that can be said about this, and certainly so much more to be said. Did you have thought?
No, I think if we can in some way, it's like we don't want to be an enmity with those who are defending the papacy.
No.
That's not. I'm not trying to get you to become anything other than you are. I want you to be a joyful. If you're a Catholic, Roman Catholic, be a joyful Roman Catholic. But don't dump on us just because we're pointing out fact. That's what I find strange. It's almost like young Earth people, and we didn't walk on the moon and all the other type of thing. It's like, well, let's just deal with reality, right? This crisis is the biggest the church has dealt with in 500 years. And if you're not going to deal with that, then you're going to get yourself in a rabbit hole that gets really deep. And if calling us names like, oh, one of you dopes read the document, all right, we don't really care what you call us names, but we've read the document, and we're pretty intelligent people. So
And I'd also like to express my thanks and appreciation for the hundreds of people who have discovered us in the last couple of weeks.
Thousands.
Thousands of people have watched us. If you're watching us now and you haven't subscribed, we encourage you to do so, both on YouTube and in our audio app. If you appreciate our frank conversations about living and defending a Christian worldview, but we've got a lot more to say, and by God's grace, we'll continue with this ministry going forward. So with that, thank you again for listening to the Lively Faith. Thank you again to listening to the Lively Faith podcast. God bless.